A black teenager plays his guitar on a quiet street, pouring his heart into music. A white police officer interrupts, mocking him and escalating tension. What begins as arrogance turns into a symbolic act of cruelty when the officer smashes the boy's guitar. The teen, though shaken, responds with dignity, ending the scene on a powerful cliffhanger. "We don't allow noise from kids like you in this town." The words sliced through the evening like glass shattering on pavement. The small crowd that had gathered on the corner froze. The air smelled faintly of rain on hot asphalt, and the hum of the city seemed to fade as every eye turned toward the uniformed officer who had spoken. Ethan Carter, barely 17, sat on the low brick wall outside a convenience store, his old guitar resting in his lap. His fingers were still vibrating against the strings, the soft melody he had been playing now trembling into silence. He looked up slowly, his brown eyes catching the streetlight, his expression unreadable. The officer, a broad, middle-aged man with sharp creases on his forehead, stepped closer. His badge gleamed under the flickering light, as if it carried some unspoken threat. His lips curled into a smirk, the kind that always carried more than arrogance. It carried entitlement. "You think you're some kind of star," he sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Out here begging with that toy?" The crowd shifted uneasily. A mother tugged her child's hand, whispering something in his ear, as if warning him not to stare too long. An old man, leaning against his cane, shook his head, his jaw tightening. They were witnesses, silent but heavy with the weight of knowing. Ethan's hands rested calmly on the guitar. He didn't flinch, didn't argue. Silence filled the space between them, the kind of silence that burns more than words. The officer's arrogance grew in the absence of defiance. "Answer me, boy." Ethan exhaled softly, almost like a sigh carried on a breeze. His voice came low, steady, with a tone that felt far older than his years. "It's not a toy. It's music." The word music seemed to sting the officer more than any insult could have. His jaw clenched. His boots clicked hard against the pavement as he closed the distance. The crowd murmured, a faint warning in their voices, but no one stepped forward. They never did. Without warning, the officer's hand shot out, gripping the neck of the guitar. Ethan's chest tightened, but he didn't move. In a single motion, the officer yanked it away and slammed it onto the ground. Crack! The sound was deafening. The guitar's body splintered into jagged pieces, strings snapping and curling like broken veins. Gasps erupted from the crowd. The old man closed his eyes, pained, as if he had seen this scene before, too many times. Ethan stared at the wreckage at his feet. For a moment, it felt like all sound had been ripped from the world, as though his very voice had been taken away. His chest rose and fell slowly, measured, even as something deep inside him quaked. The officer stood tall, shoulders puffed, eyes darting across the crowd to make sure everyone had seen. His smirk widened, as if this act proved his dominance. "Now let's see you play," he spat. The words hung in the air like poison. Ethan knelt, his hands brushing over the broken wood, fingers grazing the strings that still trembled faintly. The guitar was gone, its heart shattered, but he was not. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted one of the snapped strings, holding it between his fingers. His voice was quiet, yet it carried. "Music doesn't break," he said. For the first time, the officer blinked. The crowd stirred. Whispers rose. Something had shifted, something subtle but undeniable, and it was not in the officer's favor. Ethan stood tall, the broken string still in his hand, glinting under the streetlight like a thin line of defiance. His eyes locked with the officer's, calm yet piercing, as if daring him to do more. And then, before anyone could react, the sharp sound of footsteps echoed from the end of the block. Heavy, deliberate. A figure in a dark suit stepped out from the shadows, his presence commanding silence. The crowd's murmurs hushed instantly. The officer's smirk faltered. Ethan didn't move, but his gaze flickered past the officer to the figure approaching. Something in his stillness suggested that the story was only beginning, that the shattered strings were not an end, but the start of a song no one expected to hear. The figure in the dark suit moved slowly through the dim light, each footstep echoing louder than the last. The street, moments ago restless with whispers, now fell into a silence so sharp it almost rang in the ears. The officer straightened, brushing at his uniform, as if to regain authority, his eyes flicking nervously between the approaching man and the broken guitar at his feet. "This is police business," he barked, though his voice cracked ever so slightly. No one answered him. The crowd watched, their eyes darting between Ethan and the suited man. Ethan stood motionless, the broken guitar strings still curled in his fingers. His chest rose slowly, the calm rhythm of someone refusing to let arrogance define him. Though his hands trembled faintly, his face revealed nothing but quiet defiance. The suited man came closer, and now the streetlights revealed his features. Broad shoulders, salt and pepper hair neatly combed back, his tie hanging crisp against a pressed shirt. His presence carried weight, though no one yet knew why. His gaze was fixed not on the officer, but on Ethan. "What's your name, son?" the man asked softly, his voice deep, measured. "Ethan," the teenager replied, his tone steady, though his throat ached. The man gave a small nod, almost as if he had already expected that answer. Then he turned his eyes on the officer, and the air thickened with a new kind of tension, an authority that didn't wear a badge, but carried far more power. The officer bristled. "This boy was disturbing the peace," he said loudly, hoping to reassert control. "Loitering, playing noise in front of a business. I was just doing my job." The words rang hollow. Everyone in the crowd had seen what had happened. They had seen the smirk, the cruel hand that tore away more than just wood and strings. The suited man's eyes didn't waver. "Is that what you call justice? Breaking the only thing he had in his hands?" The crowd murmured, voices rippling like waves, the truth hanging heavy in the humid night. The officer's face flushed. His authority, once absolute, now faltered under the scrutiny of eyes that no longer seemed willing to look away. He jabbed a finger toward Ethan. He had no permit to perform. He was causing a scene. People like him. The last words stumbled from his lips, and even he realized he'd said too much. The suited man's gaze sharpened, cutting through the officer like glass. Ethan remained still, watching, holding the broken string tightly, as if it were both evidence and shield. He did not need to raise his voice. The silence around him spoke louder than anger ever could. The officer shifted his stance, sweat gathering on his brow despite the cooling night air. For the first time, he seemed aware of the crowd, not as background, but as witnesses. Each face carried a story, each pair of eyes a quiet judgment that pressed heavier than any handcuffs. "You don't understand," the officer muttered, lowering his voice, though the crowd leaned closer to hear. "These kids, they think they can do whatever they want. Someone has to keep order." The suited man finally spoke again, his voice steady, but edged with steel. "Order isn't built on fear, it's built on respect, something you clearly never learned." The words struck harder than the smash of the guitar. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The officer's jaw tightened, his pride wounded in front of those who once trembled at his authority. He opened his mouth to respond, but found nothing. Ethan, still silent, bent down. Carefully he gathered the broken pieces of his guitar, cradling them as one would gather the pieces of a fallen bird. His movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, refusing to let the destruction define him as defeat. The crowd watched with reverence. Mothers held their children closer, as if silently teaching them what dignity looked like in the face of cruelty. As Ethan straightened, the broken guitar in his arms, he spoke, not to the officer but to the crowd itself. His voice was soft, but it carried. Music isn't silence. Even broken, it still sings. The officer froze. The crowd erupted in low murmurs, admiration and anger swirling together, all directed at the man who had tried to destroy a boy's spirit, but had instead revealed his own emptiness. The suited man's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, but his eyes remained locked on the officer. His next words came calm, but heavy with promise. "This isn't over, and you'll regret ever touching that guitar." The officer's chest rose sharply, indignation boiling inside him, but his voice failed him. For the first time in years, he wasn't in control, and as the crowd's attention shifted from his badge to Ethan's calm presence, he realized something terrifying. Authority meant nothing when the truth was louder than fear. "Everyone disperse." The officer barked, his voice louder than before, harsher, desperate. His hand hovered over his holster, not to draw but to remind everyone of the steel he carried. The once hushed crowd didn't move. Their feet stayed rooted, their eyes locked on the scene, unwilling to pretend they hadn't witnessed what had just happened. The silence unnerved him more than any words could have. The suited man crossed his arms, calm as stone. Ethan stood beside him, clutching the broken guitar to his chest like something sacred. The boy's silence was heavier than any insult. "You heard me," the officer growled. "This is police business. Clear the street." From the corner, the old man with the cane leaned forward and muttered, loud enough for others to hear. "Police business? That's what you call breaking a boy's soul?" Murmurs spread again, sharper now, bolder. The officer's jaw tightened, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. The suited man's lips curved slightly, not a smile, but something colder. "Seems the people don't agree with you," the officer turned on him, puffing his chest. "And who exactly are you to stand here and interfere?" The man took a step closer. His presence didn't shout, it whispered, but with the kind of whisper that made the loudest men fall silent. He leaned slightly forward, his voice low but clear. "Someone who doesn't answer to you." A ripple of recognition passed through the crowd. A woman near the back whispered something to her friend, her eyes widening. Another man nodded slowly, as if he too had begun to understand. The officer caught it, the shift in their faces, the murmur that spread like fire. His throat tightened. "What's that supposed to mean?" he snapped. Though his words sounded weaker now, Ethan's gaze moved between them. He could feel it too. Something about the man in the suit carried more weight than the uniform standing in front of him. The suited man didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked to Ethan, his expression softening for the briefest of moments. "You play beautifully," he said quietly, "even when silence is forced on you." Ethan's throat burned, but he gave a small nod. The officer scoffed. "Spare me the poetry. This kid was loitering, making noise, disturbing the peace. I won't stand here and be lectured for doing my job." The suited man turned his head, his eyes like steel under the flickering light. "You didn't just break an instrument. You revealed yourself, and soon enough everyone will see you for what you are." The crowd stirred again. Whispers became words. "I think I know who he is. Could it really be? My God, it's him." The officer's heart pounded faster. He felt it, the control slipping like sand through clenched fists. For the first time in years, his badge didn't shield him. Instead, it weighed heavy on his chest. "Enough!" he barked, his voice cracking. He pointed at Ethan. "You pick up your trash and get off this street, now, before I take you in." Ethan lifted his chin, the broken guitar still in his arms. His voice was calm, even. "You already took what mattered. There's nothing left to take." The words landed like a blow. The officer staggered for a reply, but the suited man stepped between them. His eyes narrowed. "Touch him again and you'll regret it more than you can imagine." The officer's hand twitched at his belt. The crowd gasped, tension spiking like electricity. But before anything could ignite, a new sound cut through. The street, the low, steady hum of an approaching vehicle. Headlights turned the corner. A black sedan rolled slowly toward the gathering, sleek and polished, its windows tinted. The officer's stomach sank. He knew that car. The suited man straightened, his presence now unmistakable. He glanced at the officer, then at the crowd, and finally at Ethan. His voice came quiet but final, like a gavel striking wood. "This night is only the beginning." The sedan stopped. A door opened, and as polished shoes hit the pavement, the officer's last defense, his arrogance, began to crumble. The sedan's engine purred into silence, its headlights washing the street in a pale glow. Every head turned as the back door opened, with slow, deliberate grace. Polished black shoes touched the pavement first. Then a tall man stepped out, his tailored suit catching the streetlight, his expression grave yet commanding. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "It's the mayor." Someone whispered. "Mayor Wallace," another voice confirmed, disbelief laced in every syllable. The officer's breath caught, his face drained of color, his rigid stance faltering as if the ground itself had shifted beneath him. The man he had dismissed as interfering was no stranger. He was the most powerful figure in the city. Mayor Wallace closed the door behind him, his sharp eyes scanning the scene. He took in the broken guitar at Ethan's feet, the boy clutching its shattered pieces to his chest, the uneasy faces of the onlookers, and finally, the officer standing stiffly, sweat glistening at his temples. "Explain," the mayor said, his voice low, steady, unyielding. The officer's mouth went dry. He scrambled for words, his arrogance collapsing into excuses. "Sir, I mean, Mr. Mayor, this boy was loitering, disturbing the peace, drawing a crowd without a permit. I was simply enforcing the law." The mayor's gaze sharpened. "By destroying his guitar?" The officer froze, his tongue tripping over the silence. The crowd's murmurs swelled, their disbelief now fueled by the mayor's presence. Ethan didn't speak. He stood quietly, holding his broken guitar like a wounded limb, his dignity unshaken even in the spotlight of power. His silence spoke louder than protest. Mayor Wallace stepped closer, his polished shoes echoing against the cracked pavement. He stopped in front of Ethan, lowering his voice so the words carried only between them, though everyone strained to hear. "What's your name, son?" "Ethan Carter," Ethan replied softly, his voice steady despite the tightness in his chest. The mayor studied him for a long moment, his eyes lingering on the snapped strings in Ethan's hands. Then he turned back to the officer. "You said he was disturbing the peace," Wallace repeated. "Tell me, does peace fall apart when a young man plays music on a street corner? Or does it fall apart when the one sworn to protect it destroys it with his own hands?" The officer's lips parted, but no answer came. His authority, once unquestionable, now looked small and pitiful under the mayor's words. The old man with the cane chuckled bitterly. Finally, someone saying it plain. The crowd nodded, their whispers swelling into something more dangerous. Agreement. The mayor ignored them, his focus still fixed on the officer. "You broke more than wood and strings tonight. You broke trust. You broke dignity. You broke the very thing you wear that uniform to protect." The officer's face reddened, but his silence betrayed his guilt. Then, to everyone's surprise, the mayor turned back to Ethan. His expression softened, his voice no longer sharp, but heavy with something unspoken. "You play guitar?" Ethan blinked. The question was almost too simple, too gentle after everything. "Yes," he answered quietly. "I did." Wallace's eyes dropped to the broken pieces in Ethan's arms. For a brief moment, his gaze carried something deeper, recognition, memory loss, the kind of look of a man who once heard music in places now silent. "Then play again," the mayor said firmly. Ethan's throat tightened. His fingers trembled around the shattered body of his guitar. "I can't. It's gone." Wallace held his gaze. "Music doesn't vanish when strings break. It lives here." He touched his chest over his heart. "And sometimes the world needs to hear it again, especially when silence tries to take it away." The words sank deep, not only into Ethan but into the crowd. Faces softened. Mothers held children tighter. Strangers exchanged looks heavy with emotion. The officer shook his head, desperate to regain ground. "With all due respect, sir, this boy broke the law." "Enough!" The mayor cut him off sharply, his voice slicing through the night. "The only law broken tonight was decency, and you were the one who shattered it." The officer's jaw locked, but fear now flickered openly in his eyes. He was cornered, his shield of arrogance stripped away in front of the very people he once commanded. Mayor Wallace turned back to Ethan, his tone final. "You will play again, Ethan, and when you do, this city will listen." The crowd erupted in murmurs of astonishment. The officer staggered backward, his authority crumbling with every word, and Ethan, still clutching the pieces of his broken guitar, felt something stir inside him, not just humiliation or anger, but a spark of something greater, hope. The crowd lingered long after most scenes like this should have ended. Usually, when an officer barked orders, people scattered. But not tonight. Not after the mayor himself had stepped into the circle of streetlight. Ethan stood still, the broken pieces of his guitar heavy in his arms. His chest ached with a storm of emotions, shame, anger, disbelief. But threaded through them was something quieter, something that refused to die. The mayor's words still echoed, "You will play again, Ethan, And when you do, this city will listen. But how could he? His guitar lay in splinters. His music was silenced. The officer shifted uneasily, eyes darting from the mayor to the watching crowd. He had relied on fear for years, but now the faces looking back at him were no longer afraid. They were expectant. They were waiting. "Sir, with respect," he tried again, his tone defensive. "You can't mean to reward this boy. He was disrupting public order. I was doing my duty." Mayor Wallace's eyes cut to him sharply. "Your duty was to protect, not to humiliate, not to destroy." The crowd murmured their agreement. A woman near the front, holding her daughter's hand, added loudly, "That boy's music was the only light on this street tonight. He wasn't disturbing anyone." The officer's jaw clenched. His authority was bleeding out before his eyes, and every word from the mayor only made it worse. Ethan's voice finally broke the tension, soft but clear. "Even if I wanted to, I can't play anymore." He looked down at the snapped strings and shattered body in his hands. His throat tightened as he whispered, "It's gone." The mayor stepped closer, his presence warm despite the steel in his posture. "A guitar is wood and string. Music is spirit. You still have that." Ethan met his gaze. Something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, maybe even memory. The mayor's voice dropped lower, almost like he was speaking to himself. "Once, long ago, I knew someone who played like you. Every note carried hope. Every song carried truth, and the world tried to silence him too." The crowd leaned in, curious. The officer frowned, confused by the mayor's cryptic words. Ethan swallowed. What happened to him? Wallace's eyes darkened, but his voice was steady. He never stopped playing, and though they broke him, his music outlived the ones who tried to silence it. Ethan's chest tightened. His fingers brushed the broken strings. Something inside him stirred. The memory of chords, of melodies, of the sound that used to fill the air. The officer scoffed, desperate to regain ground. "Sir, with all due respect, this is nonsense. He's just a boy with a broken guitar. Nothing more." The mayor turned sharply, his gaze cutting like glass. "You broke that guitar, but you cannot break what he carries inside him. That's something you'll never understand." The crowd erupted with murmurs again, louder this time. They were no longer passive watchers, they were witnesses. The old man with the cane pushed forward, his voice rough but strong. "Let the boy play again, we'll listen." The words spread like wildfire. "Yes, let him play. Give him another guitar. Let us hear him." The street pulsed with a new energy, expectation, hope, defiance. The officer felt it pressing down on him, suffocating. Ethan's chest rose and fell. He wanted to believe, but doubt still. Ha gnawed at him. He whispered mostly to himself, "What if I can't?" The mayor placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You can, because music is not about perfection, it's about truth. And truth has never needed permission to be heard." The officer shook his head violently, raising his voice above the swelling crowd. "This is absurd. You're letting a child make a mockery of law and order." But even as he shouted, his words fell flat. No one looked at him anymore. Every eye was on Ethan. The boy closed his eyes. For a moment, the broken guitar in his arms didn't feel like an end. It felt like a beginning. He could almost hear the notes again, not from strings, but from memory echoing in his heart. When he opened his eyes, his voice came soft but firm. "Then I'll play again." The crowd roared, a wave of applause and cheers breaking the night's heavy silence. The officer stumbled back, panic flickering in his eyes. The world he had controlled so easily was slipping away, and no badge could shield him from it. The mayor's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Good," he said, "because the city is about to learn what music really sounds like." And, with those words, the first cracks in the officer's shield of arrogance began to spread wider than ever. The crowd's cheers rolled like thunder through the narrow street, echoing off brick walls and storefront windows. Ethan felt the weight of every eye on him, expectation pressing against his chest. For the first time he wasn't invisible, but still, he clutched a broken guitar. "I said I'll play," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the excitement. "But how?" Mayor Wallace stepped closer, his steady hand still firm on Ethan's shoulder. His tone carried both promise and command. "Leave that to me." The officer staggered forward, desperate to reclaim control. This is ridiculous. You can't turn the city into a stage for this boy. His eyes darted from the mayor to the crowd, but their faces gave him nothing, only judgment, disappointment, even disdain. The old man with the cane leaned on it, shaking his head. You had no problem turning this street into a stage for your cruelty. The officer's face burned. His badge, once a shield, now felt like a target. Ethan shifted uneasily, doubt clawing at him. He could hear the melody in his mind, but the splintered wood in his arms mocked him. I can't do it without my guitar. The mayor's voice dropped low, reassuring but unyielding. Then you'll have one. He turned to his driver, who stood silently near the sedan. Get me an instrument, now. The driver nodded and slipped back into the car. Within minutes the engine roared to life, and the sedan disappeared into the night. The officer scoffed. You're wasting your time. No one cares about this boy's noise. By morning, they'll forget all about him. But even as he spoke, the truth betrayed him. Phones glowed in the crowd, cameras recording, messages typing, live streams running. The city was already watching. A teenage girl near the front whispered to her friend, loud enough for others to hear, "He's gonna play for the mayor." That cop smashed his guitar and now the mayor's helping him, another voice said. The whispers grew, spreading like wildfire. The mayor stood up for a kid. The cop broke his guitar. Something big is happening tonight. The officer's stomach churned. He had built his career on silence, people looking away, people swallowing their words. But now words were louder than sirens. Ethan tried to breathe through the storm inside him. His fingers still curled around the broken string he had held since the moment of destruction. He could feel its sharpness pressing into his skin, reminding him that even broken things could cut deep. He whispered, almost to himself, "What if I'm not enough?" The mayor heard him. He crouched slightly, meeting Ethan's eyes at his level, his voice softer than before. "You are more than enough, not because of a guitar, not because of me, because of what's already inside you. They can break wood and string, but they can't break what you carry here." He tapped Ethan's chest with 2 fingers just above his heart. The words sank into Ethan like water on dry soil. His throat tightened, but for the first time, he didn't feel small. The key. Officer barked a bitter laugh, trying to hide the crack in his voice. "This is madness. You're coddling him like he's some kind of hero." Wallace stood tall, his presence towering over the officer's shrinking figure. "No," he said firmly. "He's not a hero. He's a reminder. A reminder of the truth you tried to silence." The crowd erupted in agreement, their voices stronger now. Some chanted Ethan's name softly, others clapped, others simply stood straighter as though his courage had given them their own. For the first time, Ethan looked out at them, not as strangers, but as witnesses, maybe even as believers. His chest swelled, not with arrogance, but with something he had never felt in public before: pride. The officer's breathing grew shallow. He felt the noose of accountability tightening, not from ropes, but from eyes. His authority was slipping, his arrogance collapsing, and every second Ethan stood there, the city's memory carved deeper. Then the sound of an engine returned. The black sedan pulled back into view. The driver stepped out, holding a guitar case carefully in both hands. The crowd hushed instantly. The case was opened slowly, deliberately, as though unveiling something sacred. Inside, a polished acoustic guitar gleamed under the streetlights, its strings taut, its body smooth, promising music. The driver placed it gently into Ethan's hands. For a moment, Ethan could only stare, his throat closing around the lump of disbelief. His fingers brushed the strings, and the faint vibration felt like life flowing back into him. The crowd leaned forward. The mayor's voice cut through the silence, clear and commanding. "Play, Ethan, play so they'll never forget tonight." The officer took a step back, his chest tight as the first notes hovered just on the edge of existence. And the city, for the first time in years, held its breath. The guitar sat in Ethan's lap like a heartbeat waiting to be heard. His fingers hovered just above the strings, trembling slightly. For a moment, the weight of silence pressed harder than the noise of the crowd. Hundreds of eyes were locked on him, holding both anticipation and hope. He took a deep breath. And then he strummed. The First chord rang out sharp and clear, vibrating through the night air. The sound sliced through the silence, chasing away the tension like sunlight breaking clouds. The crowd gasped as though they hadn't expected something so pure to come from someone so young. A child's voice from the back whispered, "He's good." Ethan closed his eyes and let the music guide him. His fingers danced across the strings, not rehearsed, not polished, but raw enough to cut through hearts. Every note was soaked in memory. The sting of the officer's insult, the sound of wood shattering, the humiliation of being told he was nothing. And yet, within the sound, there was also defiance, the undeniable rhythm of survival. The officer shifted uneasily, his jaw tight. The boy's music was not just sound, it was testimony, louder than any accusation, impossible to silence. He muttered under his breath, "This won't change anything." But even he didn't believe it. The mayor folded his arms, watching Ethan as though the boy was unveiling a part of the city that had been hidden for years. The truth wasn't in speeches or policies or press conferences. It was here, in the trembling hands of a teenager who refused to stay broken. Ethan's song grew bolder, swelling with courage. The melody wrapped around the listeners like a story unfolding without words. Some in the crowd began to sway, others closed their eyes, and a few wiped tears from their cheeks. An old woman near the front clasped her hands, whispering prayers between sobs. A young man lifted his phone higher, streaming the moment live. Already comments poured in on screens across the city. "Who is this boy?" "That cop broke his guitar. Now listen to him. History is happening right here." The officer tried to shout over the music. "Enough, stop this now." His voice cracked in desperation, drowned by the chords. He reached forward as though to grab the instrument again, but two community members stepped in front of him, shaking their heads. "You touch him again," one of them said quietly, "and you'll regret it." The officer froze, realizing. The power he once wielded had dissolved into nothing. His badge no longer shielded him. It only highlighted his disgrace. Meanwhile, Ethan kept playing. His music shifted, softer now, vulnerable. A confession whispered into the strings. He remembered his late father, who had bought him his very first guitar from a pawn shop years ago. He remembered his mother humming lullabies at night when rent was uncertain. He remembered practicing in the quiet corners of his room, dreaming of being heard, and now he was heard. He lifted his head and opened his eyes. The crowd blurred before him, but he could feel their connection, like invisible strings tying every heart together. For the first time, he wasn't playing for himself. He was playing for them. The mayor's eyes glistened, though he tried to hide it behind his composed expression. Even he, a man hardened by politics and years of public life, felt something stir within him. The song climbed higher, reaching its peak, a crescendo that carried both pain and promise. Ethan's strumming grew faster, his fingers blurring. His voice, though soft, began to hum along, weaving melody with harmony. And then, silence. He ended the song with one final strum, a chord that hung in the air like a question, vibrating. Long after his hands stilled, the world seemed to freeze. For half a second there was no sound, only the echo of that final note. Then the crowd erupted. Applause roared like thunder. Cheers rang into the night and strangers hugged each other, overwhelmed by what they had just witnessed. "Encore!" someone shouted. Another voice. "Play it again!" Phones captured everything. The officer shrinking, the boy glowing, the mayor standing in silent awe. But Ethan only smiled faintly, his chest rising and falling. He whispered, almost to himself, This is what it feels like to be free." The officer staggered backward. He could feel his career unraveling strand by strand. This wasn't just a performance, it was a verdict, one that the city had delivered without a courtroom. And as the crowd's cheers grew louder, the officer realized the truth. He hadn't just broken a guitar. He had broken the silence, and now nothing could put it back together again. The thunderous applause rolled through the square like waves crashing on the shore. Ethan, still holding the guitar, looked humbled and shaken, as though he couldn't believe what he had just unleashed. The mayor finally moved. He stepped forward slowly, deliberately, each step echoing like a drumbeat. The crowd instinctively quieted, their cheers giving way to anticipation. All eyes shifted from Ethan to the man in the tailored suit, the one person who could turn this moment into history, or let it fade away. The officer stiffened, his face pale under the harsh glow of the streetlights. He tried to pull himself together, straightening his uniform and barking, "This is out of control. He's just a kid. He vandalized public order and I—" "Enough!" The mayor's voice cut through the night like a blade, firm, final. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The weight behind the word was enough to silence everything. Even the crickets in the trees seemed to pause. The officer's jaw worked nervously, but no sound came out. The mayor turned, first looking at Ethan, then at the crowd. His tone softened, though his authority remained unshaken. What you just witnessed was not merely music, it was testimony. This young man's song told us more truth than 100 reports or 1,000 speeches could. The crowd murmured in agreement. He continued, "An officer of this city, sworn to protect and serve, chose instead to humiliate and destroy. But when he broke that guitar, he revealed something deeper. He revealed his prejudice, his abuse of power, and his lack of humanity." The officer interjected, desperation creeping into his voice. "You don't understand, sir. This isn't how it looks." The mayor turned his gaze on him, eyes cold. "I saw everything, and so did the people. You cannot erase this." He gestured toward the dozens of phones still recording. The live stream's already spreading across social media. The truth is out there now, and it will not be silenced. The crowd cheered at his words. The officer, sweating, tried again. "Sir, I've given this city 20 years of service." "Service means nothing," the mayor interrupted sharply. "If it is stained with injustice, every uniform carries a duty. Tonight you betrayed yours." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ethan sat frozen, watching the balance of power tilt before his very eyes. The mayor stepped closer to the boy. His voice softened again, but it carried enough weight for everyone to hear. "Ethan, tonight you reminded us all what courage looks like. You reminded us that resilience cannot be crushed, no matter how heavy the hand that tries." He looked at the crowd. "And for that we owe you more than applause, we owe you justice." A woman in the front row clapped her hands together, tears streaking her face. Others followed, chanting Ethan's name. "Ethan, Ethan, Ethan!" The officer shook his head violently. "This is madness. You're letting a crowd decide my fate. You're letting some kid—" The mayor's expression hardened. "No, you decided your fate the moment you laid your hand on him. The badge on your chest was supposed to stand for law, fairness, and dignity. Tonight, you stripped it of meaning, so I am stripping it from you." He reached forward almost ceremonially and tapped the badge on the officer's chest. "You are hereby suspended from duty, effective immediately. There will be a full investigation, and the people will see that justice is carried out." The Kyo. Officer's eyes widened. "You can't—" "I just did," the mayor said calmly. The crowd erupted again, louder than before. Cheers, applause, and even tears of relief spread among them. Some captured the exact moment. The mayor standing tall, the officer trembling, Ethan clutching his guitar like a shield of truth. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know what to say, but for once he didn't need to say anything. His song had already spoken everything. The officer, face flushed with rage and humiliation, tried to push past the crowd, but nobody moved aside. Instead, people glared at him, some recording, some muttering words of contempt. The badge no longer protected him. It was just a piece of metal that symbolized nothing. As he disappeared into the darkness at the edge of the square, the mayor turned once more to Ethan. "You've done more tonight than you realize. You've not only stood for yourself, you've stood for everyone who has ever felt voiceless. You gave them a song." Ethan swallowed hard, gripping the guitar. I just wanted to play." The mayor placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "And you did. But sometimes music is more than sound. Sometimes it's revolution." The words lingered in the night as the crowd cheered again. This time not for politics, not for speeches, but for truth finally breaking free. The night refused to end quietly. The crowd, still buzzing from the mayor's announcement, began chanting louder than ever. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" The sound rolled like thunder through the city square, echoing off the glass buildings and stone sidewalks. Ethan clutched his guitar close to his chest, as though it were both fragile and indestructible at the same time. His fingers still trembled from playing, but his heart was steady. He had never imagined that his music, his private refuge, would become the heartbeat of an entire crowd. Cameras flashed in his face. Reporters, drawn by the swelling chants, pushed forward with microphones. "Ethan, Ethan, how do you feel right now?" one shouted. "What made you play that song?" another asked. Their voices blurred together into a storm of questions. Ethan, overwhelmed, glanced at the mayor, who gave him a small nod. "Speak," he mouthed. Ethan swallowed hard, then lifted his chin. His voice was soft at first, but grew stronger as he spoke. "I didn't play tonight to get attention. I didn't play for fame. I played because music was all I had left when someone tried to take my dignity away. And if my song meant something to you, then it means everything to me." The crowd erupted in applause again, many with tears glistening in their eyes. Suddenly, someone at the back raised their phone high above the sea of heads. "It's trending," they shouted. Heads turned. A young woman waved her phone, showing the live stream still running. On the screen, Ethan's song had already been clipped, shared, and replayed thousands of times. The title scrolled across: "Black Teen Plays Broken Guitar After Officer Humiliation, Crowd Stunned." Within minutes, more phones lit up with notifications. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. The video was everywhere. Hashtags exploded. "Let him play," "Justice through music," "Ethan's song." Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief. It's everywhere?" The mayor placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Truth has a way of traveling faster than lies. Tonight, your song is carrying all of us." The energy in the square shifted from anger to empowerment. Some people began singing the melody Ethan had just played, humming the notes as if they'd known it all their lives. Others clapped their hands in rhythm. Slowly, the crowd became a choir, their voices rising into the night, carrying Ethan's tune beyond the square, into the streets, into the city. For the first time, Ethan wasn't alone in his song. Across the square, media vans screeched to a halt. Professional news anchors rushed out, their cameras already rolling. A boom mic hovered above Ethan as a reporter declared, "We are live in downtown tonight, where a simple song has sparked what many are already calling a movement." The officer who had once stood tall now seemed like a ghost, swallowed up by the wave of voices against him. His attempt to control the moment had backfired so completely it was almost poetic. Meanwhile, Ethan's best friend, Malik, pushed through the crowd, eyes wide with awe. "Bro, you don't even realize what you just did," he said breathlessly. "You didn't just play for them, you played for all of us who've been silenced. Man, you're a legend already." Ethan shook his head. "I'm not a legend. I just played." "Exactly," Malik grinned, "and that's why it's powerful." As the chants grew louder, a woman in her 50s stepped forward, her voice trembling. "My son, he was stopped last year, treated like he didn't matter. But tonight, when I heard your song, I felt like he finally mattered again." She wiped her eyes. "Thank you." Ethan blinked, his throat tightening. He had never known. His music could heal wounds he couldn't see. The mayor addressed the crowd again, his voice rising above the chorus of chants. "This city must not forget tonight. Let this boy's song remind us all. Justice is not optional. Humanity is not optional. Dignity is not optional." The crowd roared in agreement. By now, the live stream had exploded into millions of views. Screens all across the country glowed with Ethan's face and his melody. People in living rooms, on buses, in cafes. Everyone was watching. Back on the square, someone began handing out candles. Within minutes, the square transformed. Thousands of tiny flames flickered in the night, surrounding Ethan in a sea of light. He stood in the center, his guitar cradled in his arms, the boy who had been humiliated, now lifted up like a symbol of hope. As the crowd sang his tune in unison, Ethan whispered to himself, "It's bigger than me now." The mayor, hearing him, nodded. "Yes, Ethan, it always was." The city square was still glowing with candlelight when dawn broke. The first rays of sunlight spilled across the crowd, painting their faces gold as if the universe itself had come to bear witness. Thousands remained, refusing to let the night's fire die out. Ethan sat on the edge of the fountain, his guitar resting across his knees. He hadn't slept, but his heart was stronger than ever. The melody he played last night still lingered in the air, sung softly by strangers who had become brothers and sisters in unity. Across the city, the ripple effect had already begun. News channels replayed the footage every hour. Social media, flooded with clips of Ethan's trembling hands strumming his battered guitar, his voice breaking through tears, yet lifting a city. Journalists described it as a modern protest, not of fists, but of strings. And for the disgraced officer, his world crumbled. Videos showed his face in shame as he was escorted away after suspension. Civil rights lawyers prepared charges, commentators debated his actions, but the verdict was already written in the eyes of the people. He had been defeated not by force, but by music. The mayor, meanwhile, stood firm. Early in the morning, he called a press conference right in the square. Thousands gathered again, their voices hushed as microphones surrounded him. Ethan stood beside him, guitar in hand. "Last night," the mayor began, his deep voice steady, "this city witnessed more than an injustice. We witnessed a boy who turned pain into hope, humiliation into harmony. And in doing so, he reminded us that dignity cannot be broken, not by violence, not by hatred." He turned toward Ethan. "This young man's song will not be forgotten. Starting today, the city council and I declare that his melody, recorded here in this square, will be preserved in our archives as a song of justice." The crowd exploded in applause. Tears streamed down faces, hands clapped, and chants of "Ethan, Ethan" filled the air. Ethan's heart pounded. "Song of justice," he whispered. The mayor nodded. "Your song belongs to history now." Suddenly, the city's youth choir, who had been quietly standing behind the stage, stepped forward. Without warning, they began singing Ethan's tune in harmony, their voices lifting into the sky. The melody that had once been his lonely cry was now carried by dozens of voices, layered with strength, turning into an anthem. Ethan's knees nearly buckled. He pressed a hand over his chest, overwhelmed. That's my song," he whispered, tears spilling. "It's our song now," Malik said, grinning proudly at him from the side. The mayor raised a hand. "And today, to honor that, we give Ethan an official city medal for courage and resilience. May it remind him, and all of us, that truth always wins." Gasps and cheers shook the square as the mayor placed the medal around Ethan's neck. Cameras captured the moment, broadcasting it live across the nation. A boy who had once been humiliated by force now stood crowned by respect. Reporters shouted, "Ethan, how does it feel?" Ethan's voice cracked as he answered, "It feels like I don't have to be afraid anymore, and I hope no other kid has to be either. This isn't just about me, it's about us." The choir swelled louder, joined by the crowd, joined by the city itself. From apartment balconies, from rooftops, from passing cars, people sang along. The anthem spread like wildfire, Ethan's melody uniting voices of every color, every age, every background. Across the nation, clips of the anthem played. People in different states picked up guitars and pianos, playing Ethan's tune. Schools shared it in assemblies. Churches sang it in services. Activists used it in marches. The song had escaped the square. It belonged to the world. And for Ethan, the boy who once played quietly in a corner, the transformation was complete. Later that evening, as the crowd finally dispersed, Ethan and Malik sat together, watching. The last few candles flicker out. The medal gleamed faintly against Ethan's chest, but his eyes were fixed on his guitar. "You realize what you did, right?" Malik nudged him. "You didn't just play. You changed things." Ethan gave a small, humble smile. "I didn't change things. The people did. I just gave them a song." Malik laughed. "And sometimes, partner, that's all it takes." The mayor walked past one last time, pausing to place a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "History will remember tonight, but more importantly, so will we." As night fell again, Ethan strummed a soft chord. This time he wasn't alone. From somewhere down the street, someone hummed along. Then another joined, and another. until once again the city was singing. What began as humiliation had ended as a legacy written not in anger or revenge, but in music, a song that would echo long after the candles had burned out.